A couple of months ago, I took you with me for my first Renuva session. And so many of you wanted me to give you an update on my treatment. I'm actually going to see Dr. Rodriguez, my Renuva provider, today for a follow-up appointment. And of course, I will bring you along. Now, if you missed my video on my first Renuva session, I will link it down below in the info box. In that video, Dr. Rodriguez talks in detail about what Renuva is. But just in a nutshell, Renuva is an injectable treatment designed to restore volume loss by stimulating the body's own fat production, effectively acting as a scaffold for new fat cells. So not unlike Sculptra or Lanuma, Renuva is a biostimulator. But unlike Sculptra and Lanuma, which stimulate the body's own collagen production, Renuva stimulates the body's own fat production. Like I said, in my first Renuva video, Dr. Rodriguez talks in detail about what Renuva is, where it comes from, what to expect from a treatment, how long results from a treatment are going to last, and so on. And of course, in that video, I show you my full treatment. But I know many of you had follow-up questions for Dr. Rodriguez, and I'm going to try to ask him all of your questions today. Now, honestly, I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to get more Renuva or not, because since I see myself on a daily basis, when looking in the mirror, in the camera, when editing my videos, it is so hard to tell whether there indeed is a difference or not. Some days I think, yes, and there definitely is a difference. And other days I think, nope, nothing has happened. Some of you have suggested that you can see a difference. But like I said, for me personally, since I see myself on a daily basis, and since results from Renuva are slow and gradual, unlike results from filler, which are instant, results from Renuva or other biostimulators, again, are slow and gradual, because of course it takes time for the body to produce either fat or collagen. So because of that, it is sometimes so hard to say whether there indeed is a difference or not without looking at before and after pictures. So I'm going to see Dr. Rodriguez in about half an hour. We will take a look at my before and after pictures and then decide whether I'm going to get a bit more Renuva or not. And in case you're new here, or you have for some reason missed why I'm getting these treatments in the first place, I do talk about that in detail in my first Renuva video, as well as in some other videos, which I will link down below in the info box. So let's take a quick look at my before and after pictures, and then Dr. Rodriguez is also going to go over them with us and make further treatment suggestions. Now, first of all, these pictures are taken in the most horrific overhead fluorescent lighting, and they highlight every flaw and imperfection, which is probably not a bad thing for before and after pictures. But I can definitely see a subtle difference in the after picture. I think overall my face just looks a bit healthier, a bit fuller. I can even see a tiny difference under my eyes, and I do feel my neck looks smoother. And then from this angle again, I can see a subtle difference, especially under my cheekbones. It has filled in nicely. Again, I can see a subtle difference under my eyes. And again, I do think my neck looks a bit smoother. And then unfortunately in this after picture, the sun decided to come out and shine through the window, so it is a bit overexposed. But I can still see a subtle difference, especially in my neck in this picture. And again, I think overall my face looks just a tiny bit fuller and healthier. But let's see what Dr. Rodriguez thinks.
Here we're looking at the before and after. We're about, was it 4 months, 5 months?
I think it's, yeah, about 4 months.
4
probably.
months. Mm-hmm. You can see there's some improvement in the cheek area, right here, compared to here. We didn't address the temporal region last time, and that's what we're going to be addressing today as well, and also refilling the cheek area where we have a little bit there. But you can see a big improvement on the neck. If we look at this angle here, you can kind of see here that this is before the cheek area. Here it's a little more full, but we still have some areas that we could address.
But the neck definitely looks better.
Yeah,
that's
the neck,
what I noticed.
The
from
neck
the
looks a
store.
lot better, a lot smoother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here's another view. So here you can see the before and after in the cheek area. And here you can see it's a little fuller here, but we could still use a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a good view of the neck as well.
Yeah. It's definitely a subtle difference.
Mm-hmm.
And these pictures are obviously
Yeah.
horrific.
Yeah, exactly. I think in person it looks a lot better. Here you can really see the difference.
Yeah.
The hollowness here, and here it's a lot more filled in, but could still use a
And
little bit more.
even here, though, I can see, even above the cheekbone, I can see a bit of a difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would even say a tiny bit above the lip, at least in this picture.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to address the temples today.
That's the temples.
A little bit here.
The cheek, and then we'll do the neck again.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. I'm just going to mark here where we're...
How far under the eye can you take this?
It has to be kind of right underneath. You mean like, oh, how far underneath here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go up until like here. I'll show you another shot.
Okay.
If I put a dot there, I can show you kind of where it is. But I can't go like really underneath.
Sort of to the orbital bone, or?
No. So I don't go deep.
No, so I didn't mean deepness. I mean how far, like to the lash line, can you take it?
So I'll show you, but not that close to the lash line.
Okay. Just because the skin is too thin there?
Mm-hmm. There's not really a lot of fat there. Because the fat that we have there is underneath. It's deep, and you don't want to put it in those fat pads.
So what do you do for the under eye area then?
So I can do fat grafting. And then you're like, no.
You and your fat grafting. But that's interesting. You just said there is not a lot of fat under the eye. So why would you then do fat grafting there?
With the fat grafting, it's actual fat. The problem with Renuva is that if you don't have a lot of fat, if you don't have any fat there, the Renuva is not going to work.
Oh, so it's not going to attract
Mm-hmm.
the
So
cells
it's not going to be
there.
as effective.
Okay.
It's more that. I mean, you can always try it, but the problem is that then it's, you spend all this
So
money.
it has to actually be injected in places where
there's
there
fat.
is or was fat.
Or was fat,
Okay.
yeah.
Versus...
Which is why if you go deep, like for fat grafting, you go deep and
Okay.
you put it on like on the bone and to bring up that volume.
I see. So that can be put in places where there wasn't fat before.
It wasn't fat.
I see.
Yeah.
And it actually survives there as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, since this is donated tissue, the question was, do people know what they're donating their tissue for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they know that it can be used for that.
For cosmetic purposes?
Yeah.
And the other question was, since this is donated tissue, and we talked about this in the first video, but I think maybe if we explain it a bit more in layman's terms,
Yeah.
it's acellular material, but I don't think people quite understand what that means. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of concern about it containing DNA.
Yeah, so when we mean acellular, means A meaning none, means it has no cells. The DNA is what's inside the cell. So everything that's inside a cell is gone. So we just have the framework, and that's what attracts the fat cells.
Okay. How do you feel something like this that is maybe more natural since it is human tissue versus
So
something like
yeah, so Sculptra, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's considered a biostimulator, right? So you're definitely going to have some of it that doesn't get dissolved 100%. You have seen cases where you get these little granulomas from the Sculptra, and that's just your body encapsulating a foreign body and saying this is not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
So, the other thing is with Sculptra, when you do a facelift, you do see a lot of scar tissue
Really?
that you don't see with other modalities.
So you do facelifts. So you say that you don't like to do facelifts if somebody had Sculptra?
I'll do it, but then I know that I'm going to be running. I mean, if they've done Sculptra once, it's not a problem. But if they've done Sculptra a lot of times, then you could run into a lot of scar tissue because of that inflammatory response.
Okay.
So, for example, we use Sculptra, not Sculptra, but Vicryl for like the internal bras, and it's just it's the same Vicryl mesh. This is a mesh. It dissolves over the next 2 years, and then you're left with a bunch of scar tissue.
Okay.
Now that's what we want for the internal bra, for the breast lifts, but it's the same idea. It's this inflammatory response that then leaves a scar.
Okay.
So the idea is that the Sculptra is probably doing something along those lines, even though it is stimulating collagen.
Versus something like this, Renuva, you don't think there's the risk? So somebody can have a ton of Renuva but still could get a facelift?
Yeah,
if they
because
wanted to.
the scaffolding from Renuva completely disappears, and now you just have fat.
Okay.
So there's no remnant of it.
So this is really the future of biostimulators.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get started.
Just a little warning here. If you don't like the look of needles or a tiny bit of blood, I am continuing to ask Dr. Rodriguez your questions, but while he's doing my treatment. So if you don't like the look of needles, it might be best to just listen from here on out. And I will put a timestamp in the description box for when it is safe for you to watch again.
All right, so we'll start with the temple.
The nice thing about this one too, we talked about this on last video as well, is that unlike Sculptra, you can do Renuva if you have an autoimmune disease.
Right, exactly.
Now, is that just because it doesn't cause an inflammatory response?
Exactly, yeah.
Have you seen people not respond to Renuva? So I feel like I really didn't respond to Sculptra at all. Have you seen people not respond
really.
to Renuva?
The only time that I don't see it as big a response is if you inject it into like areas that didn't have a lot of fat or not as much fat.
Mm-hmm.
Or, sometimes you get these situations where like they want it's a big, especially on the body,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big area that they want filled up and it's just not enough, so they need more.
Mm-hmm.
And so they may not notice a big difference. So that can happen.
But as far as the face or neck, how many vials would you say is usually sort of efficient to get good results?
Usually 3. And then, in some cases you have to go again. I think after 2.
So 3 per treatment, like
3
we
per
did last
treatment,
time.
yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't do more than 3 per treatment because you want to treat conservatively, so you want to start with 3. And it also depends on what they want with the face. If it's only like a couple areas in the face, then maybe you can do just 1 vial for the face.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or 1 syringe for the face, and then 1 syringe for the neck.
But somebody like myself who has, somewhat substantial volume loss, you would say 3 and then another 3.
And then a
that would be
3
good.
if we think we need it, yeah.
I got a lot of questions on the cost, and I would think that would vary from office to office. Right?
Yeah, so if you go to LA, it's more expensive.
Is it? Okay.
Usually, but it's about what we charge. That itself is expensive too, because of how it's processed and everything.
Yeah.
So that's just why the cost is.
So
it is high.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
you
agree.
charge $2,200 for a big syringe, which is 3 ml.
3 ml, and then half of that for a 1.5,
1.5.
which
Okay.
you can also get in 1.5.
So what do they charge in LA? Do you know?
So I know that some of the people are doing basically they do 3,000 per ml.
Okay. Per ml.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And then that's like the highest, and then some do 1,000 per ml.
I wonder what it is in Europe. Seems like all these things are much cheaper in Europe, but I
Yeah.
don't even know if it's available in Europe yet or not.
Who knows? I mean, MTF is an American company, so I don't know. It'd be interesting because it's people donating their bodies here.
Mhm.
I wonder who knows how they would feel about it being shipped elsewhere. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm going to ask them what the sort of regulatory issues are with that.
So what are you doing on my temple right now?
I'm just
sort of
smoothing it out.
distributing it?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Making sure I don't have a horn sticking in.
exactly. We don't want to give you horns. There we go.
Now, the other question I got frequently is how long do results from this last?
As long as your fat cells.
As long as your fat cells last.
Mhm.
What does that mean? So,
So, obviously if you use it and then you go and lose a bunch of weight, you could lose some of that.
mhm.
But it's now your own fat.
Okay.
So it should last a good 10, 15 years. And then as you lose fat as you age,
Mhm.
you'll lose some of that fat.
Okay.
So that's kind of where that
So it's not necessarily permanent, but semi-permanent.
semi-permanent, yeah.
Okay.
It sort of resets your volume, and then you're going to start losing volume how you normally lose volume.
Damn it.
Yeah. The only way to get around that is if you were to use like a permanent, a permanent type of filler, which I would never recommend in the face.
Do you even still do filler in your practice?
Not really. This is the only, in terms of filler, this is as close as the filler I get is this. But like Juvederm and those kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
nope. I just don't like them.
And this isn't really a filler, it is a biostimulator.
Yeah, this isn't really a filler.
How do you feel about combining different biostimulators? I heard a doctor talk about the other day that she thinks that's sort of chef's kiss to combine different, because they all do sort of different things.
Yeah, I've never done that. The only thing I'd be worried about is you're just activating a bunch of things and then you don't really have control over what's doing what. I think I'd do it if it was like we're doing a study and then we're going to see.
Or if you spread it out, you do some collagen stimulating, 6 months later some fat stimulating.
Yeah, I think that would be probably the way to go.
But theoretically it makes sense to stimulate collagen and fat since we're losing both with age.
Sure. No, yeah, I agree. But it may be something where you do the Sculptra or one of the other ones first to see where you're at, and then you fill in the volume.
Some people were asking if there's anything you suggest after this, like any sort of dietary tricks that could help, attract more fat.
Eating a healthy diet. I know that sounds like cliche. Like, I hate saying that, but
yeah.
But when I mean healthy, I mean high in protein. Fats are good, as long as you're eating. But you just don't want to be like in a starvation type scenario where you're dieting and doing all that.
But increasing fat doesn't necessarily attract more fat cells. Increasing fat in your diet.
No. So I mean, just eating, protein would probably be the best.
If somebody was on Ozempic, would you do this, or would that sort of defeat the purpose?
So that's a good question. So what I would say with Ozempic is if they're in their maintenance phase of Ozempic, where they're not losing anymore, then we could do it. But if they're still actively losing weight, then no, it'd be a bad idea.
When you do fat grafting, do you do the same thing? Do you have to sort of mold it to the face like you do now?
Yeah.
So in a way, it's the same procedure. You inject
Very
it the same
similar.
way.
Yeah. The only difference is when I inject fat, it's kind of like a quicker motion.
Okay.
Because I want kind of the fat to go everywhere so it survives better.
Okay.
But it's pretty much the same.
And do you inject it sort of at the same depth?
Pretty much, although sometimes I do go down to bone.
Okay.
So it's a little different, and that's the plane's a little different. Because like I said, if I were to go down to bone here, it wouldn't really do anything. Because there's some fillers where you go down to bone and you fill it up there. That doesn't really.
So this basically you go into the subcutaneous tissue.
Yep, exactly where all the fat is.
3-4 millimeters deep. Oh, another question I had, can this be injected into other areas? Obviously you already covered the can in the body. The hands, okay.
Hands is very popular. And then we use it for like little dimples or like, for example, liposuction defects. We'll use it for that.
Okay.
So it works really well.
But it doesn't necessarily work well under the eyes, as you mentioned earlier.
No, I did put a little bit under your eyes, but you don't want to go too close.
Okay.
But see, I already put some under here. I don't know if you can tell. I put a little bit under there.
Okay.
And then this kind of area here.
Okay.
And you can kind of see from there to there.
Now you said earlier that this only works in places where they either used to be fat or still is fat. But does the neck naturally have a lot of fat?
A little bit, but not a lot, typically.
But it still seems to work on the neck.
Yeah, but you still, even if you have a little bit of fat, because it'll work on the back of the hands. If you have no fat, then it won't work. But usually if you have a little bit of fat cells, it'll work.
Now, does that mean there still have to be active fat cells, or they just at some point have to be fat cells?
There has to be active fat cells.
Okay.
But usually there's a little bit of fat.
So at a certain age, this wouldn't necessarily work anymore if we just don't really have...
Yeah, so there are cases where like in the back of the hands especially, where like if someone's a lot older and they don't have a lot of fat there, then it really wouldn't work.
Are there any contraindications with this?
Not particularly. As long as you don't have like an active like skin condition, things like that. But that's kind of for everything. But
no, like we said earlier, with Sculptra or Renuva, you can't do it if you have an autoimmune disease. So nothing like that, or any other disease that you know of where this couldn't be used. And we know there is no DNA in this, so obviously no disease.
So you're not gonna get the personality of someone else.
I think the fear is more disease transfer.
Yeah.
Now, somebody just asked me this yesterday. Actually, after the procedure, can they do red light therapy?
Red light, yeah.
This bleeds a lot more than Sculptra because you're not going as deep.
Yep, exactly. Sculptra just goes super deep.
Which is kind of counterintuitive. You would think the deeper, the more bleeding, but you actually where the blood vessels are. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect. All right.
Done?
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
It has been about 24 hours since my treatment. Obviously, I did get another treatment. In fact, I had 3 more syringes of Renuva, 1 in each side of my face and 1 in my neck. And we did the exact same thing about 4 months ago when I had my first session. Back then I also had 3 syringes of Renuva, 1 in each side of my face and 1 in my neck. And each syringe contained 3 ml. Dr. Rodriguez said earlier that Renuva comes in 3 ml and 1.5 ml. So altogether, I have had 6 syringes of Renuva, 6 3 ml syringes of Renuva. And honestly, I have been in my lab if you are hearing a bit of movement. And honestly, when I first started this journey, I was not expecting to get 6 syringes of Renuva. It is not a cheap treatment, and I paid for almost all of these syringes with my own money. Hey, that's not a toy. Dr. Rodriguez was kind enough to give me 1 free syringe at our first session, but I paid for 5 syringes with my own money. So again, it is not a cheap treatment. I was not expecting to pay that much money, but now I am committed. Now I want to know, does this work? You want to know, does this work? So fingers crossed, it actually does. Now I know some of you are going to say, I should have just done a fair transfer, which at this point probably would have been about the same cost. But I talked about this in my first Renuva video. Personally, to me, a fair transfer is just a bit too invasive, so I didn't want to go that route. Now, as you saw in this video, we did treat a few different areas than we did the first time around. So the first time around, we mostly focused on the lower part of my face, where I was really sunken in, and my neck. Beanie is getting restless. You want to say hi really fast? Huh? She actually got to come yesterday. She was so good. She sat in her bag and just was such a good little girl. But anyways, this time around, we treated my temples, which we didn't do last time. We also treated this area of my cheeks that was really flat, and we treated my neck. Oh, and also this area right here that is still a bit sunken in. Now, right now, I have a bit extra volume because that is what happens after biostimulators are injected, since it is liquid that is getting injected. But this bit of extra volume is going to be gone within the next few days. Hey, be a good girl, we're almost done. So I'm going to come a bit closer. I do have tinted sunscreen on because I'm sitting right in front of a window, but I think you can still see that I did get some bruising, which interestingly enough, in the first session I did not get. But I think the temples are probably an area that like to bruise. I also have a bruise right here. And then I have quite a few entry points. Now, actually, I haven't had time yet to look at the footage because of this little girl keeping me busy. But I'm assuming that Dr. Rodriguez used a needle this time instead of a cannula. So with a cannula, there are fewer entry points since the material gets spread under the skin. But since I have so many entry points right here, I am assuming Dr. Rodriguez used a needle this time instead of a cannula. Regardless, it really wasn't even uncomfortable. Well, the temples are a tiny bit uncomfortable because there's not much here. She wants to go down. There's not much here aside from skin and bone. But the cheeks or the neck, really there wasn't even any discomfort. So I hope this video was helpful. Like I said, she's getting really restless. She wants to go to the doggy park. Like I said, fingers crossed, this actually works because I am invested now. So fingers crossed, this actually works. Hopefully, you will be able to see a difference over the next few months. And of course, I will keep you posted. Any questions or comments, please leave them down below. You know, always love to hear from you. And I would love to know, have you had Renuva or a different biostimulator? And if so, what was your experience? Have you had a fair transfer? If so, what was your experience with that? Thank you so much for being here. I better take this little girl to the dog park. Until next time, bye.